panel political strategist and podcast host Angela Rye and former Republican strategist Rena Shah. Rena, you're part of a group of 150 Republicans who labeled themselves as anti-Trumpers, launching a new organization called the Renew America Movement. The goal is to find and support candidates in 2022 midterms to pivot where the GOP is headed in a post-Trump era. What made you want to be part of this movement?
Well, Rev, the Renew America movement isn't just anti-Trumpers. It's a pretty broad coalition of center, left, right people. And it's from people like myself who opposed Trump from the very beginning, but it's also people who recently voted for him. And that's important because what unites us here is not the opposition of one person. It's our shared recognition that the Republican Party has abandoned its principles entirely. And it's done it because it wants to cater to a really extremist, conspiratorial and white nationalist group of folks out there who thrive on the very fact that we are divided as Americans.
Now, Angela, we mentioned earlier, Speaker Pelosi has announced a select committee to investigate the January 6th attack. Now we're learning about former President Trump's consideration of using the Insurrection Act during the George Floyd protests last summer. Aides prepped the order if he decided to invoke it, and the Insurrection Act has only been used twice in modern history and allows the sitting president to deploy active military troops to handle domestic events. Former President Trump denied the New York Times report. Interesting to me that it was under debate during unarmed protests. But when the Capitol Hill insurrection happened, we saw no attempts from the White House to quell the violence. Is the word hypocrisy appropriate here, Angela?
I think there's a lot more that's appropriate besides hypocrisy, Rev. We have someone who has repeatedly lied about accurate reports in the press, especially in the New York Times. We also have someone who has indicated that he has a very treacherous relationship with the truth. Most importantly, we have someone who is the poster child for all things terror surrounding people of color, whether it's xenophobic comments that he made at the height of the coronavirus pandemic, or it's when he was coming down the escalator announcing that he was going to run for president and called Mexicans drug dealers and rapists. Of course, he's not afraid of the very people who he encouraged to go and act violently, to go and even come and attack his own sitting vice president at the time. There was a noose hanging on a platform on Capitol Hill. And so, of course, this is someone who urged this kind of behavior when he had the opportunity to tamper some of this down. He told these folks to stand back and stand by, right, even before January 6th. So it should be of no surprise to any of us. What we also know is that he regularly tied Black Lives Matter protesters and protests to Antifa. He called them terrorists. Yeah. He called the folks out of our names, right? And this is something that we're very familiar with. And we have to be very clear that Donald Trump's presidency may have ended, but white supremacy has not. It is going to be incumbent upon all of us to ensure that a January 6th commission actually happens and that we get to the bottom of what exactly occurred thanks to Donald Trump.
And what was instigated to help make it occur or to set the climate for it to occur. Rena, the investigation looking into Trump's organization dealings is heating up. Sources telling NBC News that the Manhattan DA's office will hit the organization with criminal charges regarding tax-related matters as early as next week. Although it's not Trump personally who will be hit with the charges, how might this bode for him, his remaining businesses, and even his re-election efforts and efforts in the midterm elections?
Well, it's no doubt going to complicate matters entirely. I mean, this is a first step where we see sort of the curtain being pulled back on what the Trump organization really is. And we know from a very inside source now, somebody who's in charge of the purse there, that this could be catastrophic for the president if it gets to the place where we get to see real numbers, what his entanglements were in terms of where money flowed in and out of. And so that's the real complication. We were waiting for that for a few years, Rev. We didn't get to see it. Is this going to change anything for Trump's base and those who are in Congress who continue to protect him? No, because there's no truth telling in today's Republican Party. And that's my very problem with today's Republican Party, is that there's no effort to catalyze any sort of reform. And so, speaking of a coalition that I joined, the Renew America movement, you've got to do that, because the fact is nothing will get people to understand what Trump is as a person. They had so many years, 5 years, of blatant, in-your-face actions that showed us who this man really was, and they still refuse to accept it. So what I want to say to my fellow Americans who still think Trump is somebody who's innocent, who is not really guilty of any sort of crime, pay attention. Now is the time to see that he's out of office. There are real serious people in law enforcement who want to make sure that this isn't a political witch hunt, like he tries to say, that we are really upholding democracy and doing our country proud by standing up for the very principles. And the principles are this, Rev, is that one party wants to attack the rule of law.
That's right.
They want to attack the norms that our democracy is founding on. And that's the real problem here, is that you can't get them to change overnight. So you need a slow effort to hold people accountable. And that's all this is. What we are seeing right now are people trying to walk away from Trump. We're going to continue to see more of that. But what we need to do is put on the pressure and expose these people for who they are and hold them to account. And that is where I am steadfast.
And we must keep that pressure on. Angela, President Biden yesterday confirmed his support for the bipartisan infrastructure plan and clarified that he did not threaten to veto the bill if it comes without a reconciliation package. This is a reversal from what he said last week about wanting the two bills in tandem. Despite coming to an agreement Thursday, there's still an uncomfortable amount of uncertainty surrounding the legislation. What problems might lie ahead between the two parties that would prevent its passing through the Senate, in your judgment?
Well, there are several, Rev. I think one bite at the apple is something that Democrats have to get very familiar with really quickly. You talked earlier to Congressmember Bass about the Senate Bill H.R. 1 or Senate Bill 1, which, of course, is the For the People Act. This is a bill they've been trying to pass since last Congress. On top of that is the Voting Rights Act that is now named after John Lewis. They're not going to get two bites at the apple there, and we're certainly not going to get two bites at the apple with an infrastructure package. I understand that Democrats want to believe in the goodwill of the Republican Party, but to Rena's point, there's now a coalition that wants to look backwards and focus on holding Donald Trump accountable, but we still have aging infrastructure in this country. We have all types of economic disparities that exist. We have people who are staying at home with loved ones and can't afford to really do that. We have people's voting rights being threatened at the local, state, and federal level, and yet there's inaction. And it's not just the Republican Party that's at fault. It's also moderate Democrats that can't seem to figure out where their values lie, and very rarely does it lie on the side with people who have been most marginalized and disenfranchised. Yes, it begins with infrastructure, but it doesn't end with voting rights. Yes, it starts with police violence, but it doesn't end at gun control and gun safety. We have to get to a point where people find their inner moral compass and understand that this is about doing what's right by the American people, regardless of what side of the political aisle you stand on. And so, to Joe Biden's point, I would love to see a bill in tandem, but tandem means that thing has to be brought together in one single package because, again, it's one bite at the apple.
One bite at the apple, saith Angela Rye. Thank you, Angela Rye and Rena Shah. Thank you both for being with us.